two words come to mind for me: sassy and classy. For me, that was Ida B. Wells. Sassy because she was courageous. She was a woman who lived at a time when black people were lynched. She spent her whole life, much of her legacy comes from the way she fought against lynching. She was sassy and classy because when you think of Rosa Parks and what she did on a bus, Ida B. Wells did the same thing 20, 30 years before Rosa Parks on a train. She was on a train. She bought a first-class ticket on the train, and she went back to where first-class passengers were supposed to be. But the conductor or some railroad official came and tried to make her give up her seat for no other reason that in the first place he didn't feel that a black woman should be in a first-class car on the train. But Ida B. Wells refused to. He wanted her to go where what was called the Jim Crow car, the car where black people were supposed to sit. The Jim Crow car, unlike the bus where the worst seats were in the back, for the train, the worst seats were in the front. That's where black people had to sit. And they were worse because they were near the engine. And the engine, that's where you get all of the dirt and the smoke and the soot and all of the things that give you asthma and make you choke and cough. And that's where black people had to sit. That's where they were trying to make Ida B. Wells sit. But she had sassy, classy Ida B. Wells had a first-class ticket, and she refused to move. She was put off the train. She sued the train company. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. She lost at the Supreme Court, but that didn't stop sassy, classy Ida B. Wells from fighting. And as I said before, she fought against lynching. She had seen two of her friends lynched, and she, from her newspaper, she would write the names, print the names of people who had committed lynching crimes. They became enraged. They burned down her newspaper. They threatened her life, and she had to flee her home and move to New York. But sassy, classy Ida B. Wells, as soon as she got settled in New York, she started her paper again, fighting for her whole life against lynching and injustice and violence and discrimination and racism against her people.
Sojourner Truth, born Isabella Bell Burnfree. That was her slave name. She was born 1797, November 26, 1883. She died. She was an American abolitionist and women's rights activist. Truth was born into slavery in New York, but escaped with her infant daughter to freedom in 1826 after going to court to recover her son in 1828. She became the first black woman to win such a case against a white man. Her occupation was abolitionist, author, human rights activist. She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth in 1843 after she became convinced that God had called her to leave the city and go into the countryside, testifying the hope that was in her. Her best-known speech was delivered extemporaneously in 1851 at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. The speech became widely known during the Civil War by the title, "Ain't I a Woman?" A variation of the original speech, rewritten by someone else using the stereotypical Southern dialect. Whereas Sojourner Truth was from New York and grew up speaking Dutch as her first language. During the Civil War, Truth helped recruit black troops for the Union Army. After the war, she tried unsuccessfully to secure land grants from the federal government for former slaves, summarized as the promise of 40 acres and a mule. Stay tuned for additional information about Sojourner Truth.
Some of you don't know who I be, but the name they gave me when I was born was Isabella Bonfrey. Name never did sit right with me. And on top of that, they only called me Belle, never did hear my whole name. And over the years, I had so many masters all naming me after themselves. The last name never mattered none anyway. But you all knows me as Sojourner Truth. All right, I named myself that because sojourner means a traveler, and that's what I do. I travels all over the place, just preaching and teaching it, or even though I'm just a woman. I'll be here to get things set right again. That's me and God. But we got to make him first in our life, and then we got to be loving ourselves. We need to take pride in who he is and learn more about who we are. Because we come from kings and presidents. We are a mighty people. And we've been doing much, and there'll be much to go. But we will be what we was meant to be.
One of the 20th century most powerful and celebrated advocates for civil rights and suffrage was born in 1875 on a cotton farm near Maysville, South Carolina. Mary Jane McLeod was the 15th of 17 children of former slaves. Samuel and Patsy McLeod, driven by an early personal belief in the power of education, Bethune secured scholarships to Scotia Seminary in North Carolina and Moody Bible Institute in Chicago, where she was the only African-American student. Among her many pioneering educational strides, Bethune fulfilled a dream to open up a school for African-American girls in Florida in 1904. Under her leadership and unswerving dedication, the Daytona Normal and Industrial Institute for Negro Girls grew from a bare house with a makeshift cardboard box desk serving only 5 students into a 32-acre, 14 buildings and 400 students. In 1923, the school merged with the Cookman Institute for Men of Jacksonville and became Bethune-Cookman College. Her home on the campus is a National Historic Landmark. Bethune turned her sights towards women's suffrage in the early 1900s, when there was little role for African American women, especially in the South. And in 1912, she joined the Equal Suffrage League, an offshoot of the National Association of Colored Women, in an era where even African American men couldn't vote because of Jim Crow laws. Bethune watched as white-dominated voting rights and suffrage organizations marched and protested nationwide. Following the 1920 passage of the 19th Amendment, Bethune rode a bicycle, door to door, raising money to pay quote-unquote poll tax, a tax imposed by white lawmakers to suppress black voting. Because of literacy tests, was also required, she conducted night classes to teach reading. When 80 members of the Ku Klux Klan, or KKK, threatened to burn down her school, Bethune held an all-night school front vigil with a groundskeeper and some of her students. The Klan backed down, and Bethune led a procession of 100 African Americans to the polls to vote for the very first time in Daytona mayoral election. The story of her defiance of the KKK spread, and Bethune became a popular speaker for the rights of African Americans. Inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois, Inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois, she opened her school's library to the public, providing the first free source of reading materials for African Americans in Florida. Determined to improve the lives and rights of African American women, Bethune held prominent roles, including president of the National Association of Colored Women, NAC. She also served as president of the Florida Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, and she fought against school segregation and brought health care to Black children. Under her leadership, the National Council of Negro Women was founded as a unifying voice for African American women and organizations. Along with serving as NCNW's first president, she also appointed a leadership role in the administration of Presidents Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. After forging a close and long-standing relationship with Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the struggle, arrived in Washington as President Franklin Roosevelt's Special Advisor on Minority Affairs from 1935 to 1944, and shared her home known as the Council House with the NCNW. Bethune was the first woman and the first African American to be honored with a statue in a public park in Washington. The monument created by Robert Burks shows Bethune handing her legacy down to children.
I kept thinking, how did I get picked to do the presentation for Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune? And then as I entered the lobby, I saw the wax figure of Dr. Dorothy Irene Height, who every day and almost in every speech she made, she talked about Mary McLeod Bethune. And that made me a little bit more. And that school is offering more than 35 majors. No other woman in her generation of the National Association of Colored Women. Now that's very important, because the National Association of Colored Women was the first major organization for African Americans in this country. And for her to become president of this organization, at that time it had 10,000 members, and it was labeled as being the premier Black women's secular organization in the whole world. She carried out her brilliant vision as an activist and carried out an activist role for women.
Yo,